2 lines on a pregnancy test. For some people, those 2 lines could be long-awaited happiness, while for others, those 2 lines could cause absolute terror. In the case of the protagonist of this story, it was the second option. She was so stunned that she decided to take a second test. All of this was the result of a series of events that began a month ago. She was at a dinner with her 2 friends, where they announced to her that they had started dating as of that day. The protagonist had known the impassive-faced boy, Min-wook, since they were children, while the redhead, Mi-ra, became her friend much later. But instead of being happy, the news seemed to deeply affect her, as she confessed that she didn't know they could be more than friends. Upon returning home, she felt like her head would explode from overthinking. She had hoped to maintain their unchanging friendship forever, which is why she had hidden her own romantic feelings for Min-wook. If she had known that she was allowed to feel that way, she admits that she would have confessed to Min-wook many years ago. Even though they were not aware of their true feelings, she couldn't help but feel betrayed. She stayed at home, lying on her bed, crying devastated. Of course, she wasn't so affected by the news as to go out and have a wild night. It was what happened next that affected her the most. Mi-ra was in her room, enthralled by the Min-wook technique, claiming that if she had known how good it was, she would have been with him much earlier. Confused, the protagonist asks what she means, and her friend starts giving her a quite graphic talk about her sexual activities the previous night, without any shame. The protagonist simply turns her chair forward and comments that Mi-ra must be very happy, while tears fall down her face unnoticed by the redhead. Mi-ra continues to tease her, asking when she would have an experience like that, revealing several important details. Hee-won, that was the name of the protagonist, who worked as a teacher and was a virgin. When she was alone, Hee-won thought, melancholic, about how happy her friends looked and seriously wondered if that Min-wook technique was really that good. At that moment, she looks among her books and sees a paper, a business card for an exclusive bar that Mi-ra had given her but that she never used. Frustrated by the affair between her friends, she decides to go out that night and finally put an end to the virginity she had carefully preserved for 27 years. Now, in the present, the protagonist looked at both positive pregnancy tests in front of her mirror, wondering nervously what she would do. Her thoughts would be interrupted by Mi-ra, who opens the door to ask her what she's doing, earning a scolding from her friend for not knocking before entering. Confused, the redhead questions when they started doing that. This, coupled with how Hee-won lunged forward to hide the pregnancy tests, makes her suspicious. The protagonist excuses herself by saying that she was exercising, flexing her arms in front of the mirror. This seems to convince the redhead, who says she'll leave her alone, but in reality, it was something she said to make her feel comfortable and takes advantage of it to pounce on her and see what she's hiding. Seeing the pregnancy tests, Mi-ra becomes saddened that she had a secret boyfriend and asks her who the father was. When the brunette answers that she didn't know, Mi-ra starts shaking her, worried that something may have happened to her. So the girl clarifies that she went to the bar that was recommended to her and it was just a one-night stand. Instead of calming her, this causes Mi-ra to shake her more vigorously, surprised that she actually went to that place and didn't even use protection, making her regret recommending it in the first place. After a few moments, the redhead says she will take her to the clinic when she finishes work at 5, which the protagonist accepts. That afternoon, the girls arrive at the clinic, where Mi-ra doesn't understand why Hee-won came in such formal attire, wearing sunglasses indoors. The protagonist defends herself, saying she wears them so she won't be recognized because, as a teacher, she had to lead by example. The redhead urges her to take them off, saying she had anticipated that it would bother her, which is why she took her to that luxury clinic, where the chances of running into someone familiar were practically non-existent. Hee-won thanks her, but as soon as she looks up, she finds Min-wook, causing her to be flustered. However, the redhead scolds him for being late instead of reacting to Hee-won's discomfort, as she had called him, thinking it would be better to have 3 heads thinking instead of 2. This irritates Hee-won, fearful of what her friend would think of her pregnancy. Mi-ra brushes it off and asks her what she knew about the baby's father, to which the girl has vague memories of watching or something, as well as a vivid image of him undressing, making her blush to the indignation of her friends who were looking for something personal. The protagonist excuses herself, saying they didn't talk about anything personal, despite it being her first time doing something like that. At that moment, 2 people enter the room, catching Mi-ra's attention, as one of them was wearing the uniform of the school where Hee-won works. Upon hearing this, she turns, outraged, not only because she encountered someone familiar but also because the girl in question was one of her students, Jun-kong. Assuming that maybe she was in a similar situation, she doesn't think much and runs towards her, tearful, shouting that she'll support her no matter what, confusing the young girl. The guy next to her touches her shoulder, equally bewildered by the situation, but the teacher doesn't stop and grabs him by the lapels to confront him. Although her shouts stop when she sees the face of the young man, and the image of the man who undressed in front of her comes to her mind. They were the same person. Of course, all this attracts the attention of the people present, who start scolding her for what she's doing. But before her friends could react, they are surprised to see Hee-won approaching them and hiding behind their backs, embarrassed. MIRA asks her what's going on, and when Hee-won whispers to her that the guy was the father of her baby, the redhead also becomes agitated and tries to approach to confront him for taking her friend's virginity. Luckily, her boyfriend holds her back and silences her before she can do that. The man asks his companion, Se-yeon, who that woman was. Upon hearing her voice, the protagonist remembers that night when he calmed her with that same calm tone as he took her virginity. Something simple but confirming that they were the same person. Se-yeon explains to the man that she was her teacher and then explains to the rest that the man was her uncle, Jun-kong, and even offers to show them identification to prove it if they're so doubtful. MIRA, obviously, tells him that it won't be necessary, and Jun-kong chooses to introduce himself formally, puzzling the group a bit with his kindness. The protagonist formally bows to apologize and greet him, and immediately goes to talk to her student, as she was quite uncomfortable with his presence. Se-yeon nervously explains that the reason she came there was for a complex matter. Although Jun-kong cuts her off, explaining that they had actually come because her parents had a brother and he wanted more information. This makes Se-yeon nervous, as she wasn't used to the title yet, and asks her teacher to keep it a secret, to which she agrees. When it's now the dark-haired girl's turn to seek answers, Hee-won becomes nervous and lies, saying that her friend, MIRA, is pregnant with her boyfriend and wanted to accompany her for her procedure. Se-yeon seemed to fall for the deception, but then the secretary called her name, indicating that it was her turn to see the doctor, causing her to shed a tear of frustration at being discovered. She promises her that she'll tell her later and goes into the doctor's office. This leaves Se-yeon in the waiting room with her uncle. It's to the latter that MIRA pays more attention, as in her mind, she admits that she feared he would be a scumbag, but he turned out to be very handsome, courteous, and possibly wealthy based on his attire. Likewise, she admires his nerves of steel because he seems quite unconcerned about encountering the woman he had an affair with at the gynecologist's. Deep down, she was dying to talk to him, but she had to control herself if she didn't want to reveal inappropriate information. Contrary to MIRA's thoughts, although Jun-kong appeared carefree on the outside, in his mind, he was crazy to have met Hee-won again, the woman who left him 250,000 won bills and disappeared. It was the first one-night stand he had in his life, but he had a great time. That was until the next morning when his mood plummeted upon seeing the bills she had left on his bed. It made him laugh like a maniac, but then he felt angry and embarrassed. That woman had paid him for sex. Despite the humiliation, he wanted to know more about Hee-won, so he did his best to find her, but he couldn't find a trace of her. This makes the fact that she ended up being Se-yeon's teacher even more incredible. He briefly looks at Min-wook and comments that it's unlikely that he's her boyfriend, so the reason why Hee-won went to the gynecologist remains a total mystery. In the office, the doctor shows the protagonist a photograph of a growing fetus and confirms her suspicions. She's 6 weeks pregnant. This dampens Hee-won's spirits, as she tries to analyze what she should do. The doctor interrupts her train of thought to ask if she came with her husband. The question confuses Hee-won, who doesn't understand whether to lie and say he's outside or tell the truth, although she's much more confused by the fact that she's being asked such an intimate question. The doctor continues, informing her that they don't perform abortions at this clinic, so if that's what she was thinking, she would have to go to another clinic. Seeing her lack of response, the woman is about to dismiss her when Hee-won interrupts to tell her directly that she's being rude. She reprimands her, saying that as her gynecologist, she should be helping bring a new life into the world and not mentioning abortion so casually just because she's not married. This scolding makes the doctor uncomfortable, and she tries to mend the situation by saying she misunderstood, but the protagonist doesn't fall for her deception and decides to leave the room, quite displeased. The first person to catch her attention is Se-yeon, who calls out for her to come closer, confusing the protagonist who didn't understand why she was still there. Se-yeon and MIRA approach to see how she's doing and what the doctor told her. The protagonist, trying to hide the truth, says everything is fine, surprising the redhead. She tells her friend that she shouldn't have accompanied her to her uterine cancer checkup, although she appreciates the gesture. It's a lie to mislead her student, but Min-wook doesn't seem to understand the hint and denies that they came for a simple checkup. Of course, he doesn't give more details since Hee-won knees him in the stomach, knocking him to the ground in pain. Now with no one contradicting her, Hee-won continues her explanation, confident that she can get out of such an uncomfortable situation. However, the secretary's call inadvertently exposes her when she yells her name to hand her the ultrasound image of her baby. At this point, Se-yeon is already piecing together what's happening, and upon looking at Jun-kong, who wears a surprised expression, it seems she has reached the conclusion she wanted to avoid. Later, Jun-kong and Hee-won find themselves at a place called Cafe Mystery, sitting in an uncomfortable silence. The guy asks if she's feeling okay, as she seemed very nervous earlier. The protagonist tries to be quite formal and with a sad look, says that she understands that as Se-yeon-kang's uncle, he must be concerned about her actions. Although the protagonist can't continue her monologue when the guy interrupts her to remind her that his name is Doo-joon, and not Se-yeon-kang's uncle, emphasizing the importance of referring to him correctly. This confuses Hee-won because this arrogant behavior seems very different from the man she met that night, which seems to disappoint her. After letting out a deep sigh, she asks him to keep her private life separate from her professional life, as no matter what she does in private, she has always strived to educate her students in the best possible way. So, even if he disagrees with her from an ethical standpoint, she makes it clear that what she did with him is something she has only done on that occasion. With that said, she assures him that she will talk to Se-yeon tomorrow, so she asks him to keep what happened between them quiet and not to see her as a bad influence on his niece. Doo-joon is left speechless, surprised by her declaration, so the protagonist decides to get up and leave. Although she understands that what's happening isn't entirely her fault, Hee-won can't help but feel guilty for what she's doing. Still, all the things that had happened were wearing her out, so she didn't have the energy to deal with him. She just wanted to escape from it all. But when she picks up her bag, Doo-joon finally stops her to ask her something. He wanted to know if the child in her womb was his. Instinctively, Hee-won touches her belly and shouts at him that no, assuring him it's only her child. Doo-joon remains skeptical and asks her to stay and talk things through properly. This makes the teacher hesitate, not understanding what he's planning, but she ends up sitting back down. Then, Doo-joon rephrases his question, asking her if he's the baby's father. Avoiding his gaze, Hee-won denies it again and, addressing him as sir, says she doesn't understand why he would even suggest it if nothing happened between them. But Hee-won stops her, making it clear that if he knows his identity, reminding him that on the night they were together, he didn't use a condom, and it was her first time. Furthermore, she didn't use contraception either. So, the chances of him being the father were quite high. Hee-won reiterates that he's mistaken, stating that someone else is the father of her baby, and she even claims she will marry him. But this doesn't convince Doo-joon, as it's illogical for her to be engaged and come to the clinic with her friends. He also points out that if she were engaged, it would mean she admitted to shamelessly cheating on her partner. Despite noticing the flaws in his logic, Hee-won insists that even if he's right, her pregnancy has nothing to do with him, and if he's concerned about her teaching qualifications, he can speak directly to Se-yeon's parents. Doo-joon questions why she insists so much on denying that he's the father, to which Hee-won continues to stick to her lie. They fall silent for a few seconds, and Doo-joon states that all the evidence points to him being the father. However, he understands that maybe the suddenness of the situation has her so defensive, so he suggests that they take some time to think and meet tomorrow with a calmer mind. The protagonist wanted to retort, but Doo-joon points out that her friends were waiting for her, so he didn't need to drive her himself. When Hee-won turns, she notices that, indeed, Min-wook and MI-ra were waiting for her in the car outside. The elegant man continues, saying that he was also busy, so he bids her farewell with a promise to meet the next day. And so, he leaves the place, despite Hee-won's calls, who still doesn't understand what he wanted from her. In the car, Hee-won calls MI-ra to tell them to leave, as she was going to her mother's house and would then go home. This surprises Min-wook, not only because of the sudden decision but also because she remembers that both she and her mother had a rather tense relationship. Because of this, he prepares to get out of the vehicle to go with her so she won't be alone. This annoys MI-ra, who sarcastically asks him who he's dating, mentioning, annoyed, that a week had passed since they last saw each other. He tries to defend himself by saying he had been busy with his project, which she knew, but the redhead points out that he had also told her earlier that he'd be busy that day. Yet as soon as he heard that Hee-won was in trouble, he rushed to her. Confused, Min-wook asks her directly what's bothering her. To this, the redhead taunts, saying that her best friend and her boyfriend had a strange relationship, which frustrates her a bit. She even mentions that he was so focused on Hee-won that he didn't even notice her all day. Of course, Min-wook responds that she's exaggerating, as the three of them had been hanging out together long before they became a couple. He explains that Hee-won didn't have anyone else who would really care for her, so it was obvious that he'd worry about her. With that said, he fastens his seatbelt and ends up asking her to stop saying those kinds of things. MI-ra doesn't respond and just looks straight ahead as the car starts. On the other hand, Hee-won goes to a complex of buildings and, upon knocking on one of the doors, an older woman with short, dark hair comes out. She asks Hee-won, without even greeting her, why she looked so tired. Sarcastically, Hee-won tells the woman, her mother, that she also looked well, earning a scolding from her for not watching her tone. They both sit in the living room, and the woman assumes that her daughter must have something to tell her since she came to visit her on a weekday, not a holiday. Hee-won denies it, and her mother immediately accepts it, going back to her reading, dismissing it. In her mind, Hee-won admits that she didn't expect comfort from her, but it saddens her that her mother didn't even ask her how she was properly. After a couple of minutes of uncomfortable silence, the protagonist breaks the silence to ask her mother if she had heard anything from her father, creating noticeable tension in the air. Hee-won mentions that she heard he was getting remarried soon, so she's quite worried about him. This angers the woman, and when Hee-won asks her how she should refer to the woman's 3 children from the woman her father was going to marry, her mom cuts her off directly, demanding that she not get involved with that woman or her children. The protagonist reflects on her life, admitting that she grew up in a loveless home. That's why she didn't really understand why she decided to come there. Maybe she wanted advice on becoming a single mother, but Hee-won dismisses it, thinking she already knows what her mother would say. She got used to being told from a young age that she was an unwanted pregnancy, so it's most likely that her mother would advise her to have an abortion, something she doesn't want to do. After getting lost in her thoughts for several minutes, Hee-won breaks the silence again, this time asking her mother if she still hated her father or if they ever loved each other in the first place. Instead of answering, the woman addresses her, saying that it's clear she's wanted to say something since she arrived, so she should just say it. What Hee-won responds with is that she wondered if her mother hated her father so much that she started to hate her as well. This theory surprises the older woman for the first time since she arrived, and she closes her book to tell her daughter that if she was just going to talk nonsense, she should leave. Annoyed, Hee-won insists on getting an answer as to why she blamed her for something that wasn't her fault, making it clear that what she was saying wasn't nonsense to her. She theorizes if her mother was so unhappy that she had no choice but to marry her father, which was why she hated her. The young woman continues her outburst, saying that if she got pregnant, at some point, they must have had feelings of affection for each other, so it didn't make sense for her mother to be so fixated on treating her as if she were the person who ruined her life. The woman acknowledges that not many people can easily accept an unwanted pregnancy, though she also points out that she always made sure to provide everything Hee-won wanted while she was growing up. With a pained expression, Hee-won affirms that, in reality, her mother never gave her love. The woman falls silent and looks away. After several minutes of silence, the protagonist wipes away phantom tears and apologizes for bothering her when she came to visit. And so, she leaves the place, thinking that her mother didn't even attempt to contradict her, showing that she hasn't changed yet. However, before reaching the door, her mother stops her to ask, worried, if she was okay or if something happened to her. Instead of making her feel better, this only makes Hee-won feel worse, so she leaves the place, slamming the door shut. At that moment, Doo-joon was in his office, working. He was the vice president of that company, apparently. A friendly-faced guy arrives to give him his lunch with a smile, something that makes the dark-haired man ask if he was a stalker, as he had given him the day off. The guy responds that he felt bad resting while he was still working hard and not even having dinner, so he decided to bring him sushi to eat. Just as he's about to eat, the guy asks him to tell him what's going on, as he knew something was wrong with him since he wasn't paying attention in the meeting. While taking a sip of water, Doo-joon tells him that he's getting married, causing him to spit out the liquid, surprised. Instead of giving explanations, Doo-joon asks him to adjust his schedule so that the wedding can be held around May, as he knew he'd be quite busy until early June. The guy smiles uncomfortably, saying he shouldn't joke with him with such a serious face, or he'd believe him. To this, his superior confirms that he's not joking. In fact, he mentions that it would be difficult to raise a child in the condo he currently lives in, so he also asks him to find a new house with a large yard where they can live. Despite the seriousness with which he speaks, the guy still asks if he's being serious. Doo-joon's way of confirming this is by making more requests, like reserving the wedding hall at a luxury hotel for mid-June. The young man concedes and says, somewhat wearily, that he'll take care of everything, as he's no one to stand in the way of the almighty Jun-kong. Now he wants to know when all of this happened, guessing that maybe it was a blind date. Doo-joon denies this, and the guy asks if it was one of the heiresses of large business conglomerates, which is also denied by the dark-haired man. This makes the guy ponder for a few minutes and ask, somewhat shocked, if it was MANHWA, the beautiful redhead model they had just hired, who asked to meet him in person. Something the businessman vehemently denies, as he hasn't even met her yet. In the end, it's clear that Doo-joon won't reveal the name of the girl he's getting married to, and he changes the subject, asking him to schedule a visit to Daehan High School for tomorrow. This request surprises the young man, as it seems the school had invited him before, but he always declined the invitation. He asks what's motivating him now. It's at this moment that he admits he's going to talk to the mother of his child. Seeing his employee's surprised face, he comments that he forgot to mention he's going to be a father, though he doesn't give him much time to process it before he continues talking about his plans to go to the school in the morning and then attend the company's morning meeting. Once the young man becomes fully aware, Doo-joon finishes by saying that the mother of his child is a teacher at that school, freezing him once again. The next day, Hee-won was sitting and writing in her notebook the name, Jun-kong, and the word, Doo-jool, which could be translated as 2 lines, several times. Apparently, she couldn't sleep due to her situation, and her head was hurting from overthinking. But as she gets lost in her thoughts, a woman next to her refers to her as Miss Jang, to get her attention and points out that a bowl-haired man is staring at her, looking serious and angry because she's not paying attention to the teacher's meeting. The principal decides to continue his speech to introduce a new member of their staff, an intern teacher named Jin-hoon Lee, who will be accompanying the protagonist. This infuriates the woman, who seems to know him, and she doesn't understand why she has to go with him. The teacher next to her whispers that it's because the intern teacher specializes in teaching Korean, and she's the only teacher in the room who handles that subject. Seeing her annoyance, the short-haired black-haired teacher offers to take care of Jin-hoon, as she finds him quite handsome, a comment that amuses the protagonist. The teacher continues, saying that apparently, Jin-hoon had a connection with the principal that allowed him to participate as an intern teacher during that time, which is why she advises her not to be so obvious in her dislike for him. Hee-won gets angry thinking about that stupid, interpersonal connection, an idea that leads to the memory of the 2 lines on the pregnancy test, and she touches her belly while whispering. This is overheard by her classmate, who asks her who Doo-jool is while looking at her notebook. This makes the protagonist nervous, and she closes her notebook tightly, shouting that Doo-jool isn't a name but a reminder to draw 2 lines in her notebook. Even though she gives an explanation to her friend, it catches the director's attention, who scolds her now for chatting. The principal concludes by informing that they would have a dinner among teachers that night, and right after that, Jin-hoon approaches to greet the protagonist as his sunbae, senior. This level of familiarity makes the black-haired teacher ask if they already knew each other, which Hee-won confirms, saying they went to the same university. But while the woman was drooling over Jin-hoon, Hee-won thinks it's better that she doesn't fall for him, as he's someone who prefers a hotel over a relationship. In the hallways, Hee-won and Jin-hoon walk together, while the guy admits he's happy to see her again after such a long time. This doesn't make the protagonist happy, and she asks him to address her as Miss Jang, instead of Sunbae, or by her first name, and also informs him that he shouldn't be so confident or friendly with the students, especially the girls. Instead of being cold, Jin-hoon smiles, declaring that she's still the same jealous person and hasn't changed. This irritates the brunette, who thinks that, in reality, he's the one who hasn't changed. She starts to remember when she first met him. She was in her 3rd year of university, and he, despite being a freshman, became one of the most popular people on campus. His parents worked in the education sector, he graduated as the 2nd best in his class, and he was quite handsome. So, he was always surrounded by people, although he didn't pay her any attention. Jin-hoon and she shared a liberal arts class, and one day he offered to buy her lunch as a thank you for lending him a pen. That was all the contact they had, a shared lunch, as after that, Jin-hoon stopped coming to that class. Inevitably, she ended up forgetting about him until one day a woman came to her, crying, asking her to let go of Jin-hoon, because he had told her they couldn't be together since he was in love with her. It turns out that he had started using Hee-won as an excuse to break up with women, even though he barely knew her. After that situation repeated multiple times, she decided to go with MANHWA to talk to him. When she confronted him, Jin-hoon just laughed, saying he saw her so calm that he thought she wouldn't mind him using her as an excuse, but it seems he was wrong. He adds that he thinks women are strange creatures who act as if they belong to someone just because they show them a little affection, and cheekily asks the protagonist if she was also jealous of him, which is why she wanted to come see him. Of course, This angered the protagonist, but not as much as MI, who didn't hesitate to slap him and start yelling all sorts of obscenities at him for his behavior. Fortunately, although there were several witnesses to that beating, the incident didn't escalate. After that, Jin-hoon was recruited into the army while she graduated from university, so she hoped she would never see him again. Now, she was standing next to Jin-hoon, putting on her best poker face, introducing him to her class, and asking everyone to be as cordial as possible with him. After finishing her speech, she looks at Se-yeon and asks him to come to her office after lunch. When her class ends, she walks out with Jin-hoon into the hallway and informs him that she doesn't have any classes during the first period, so he can walk around the campus to get familiar with the area or get ready for the next class while he waits. After asking him again to call her Miss Jang instead of Sunbae, Hee-won starts to recall her conversation from the day before with Jun-kong and realizes that his name is quite similar to Jin-hoon's, and it reminds her of the two lines. Lost in her thoughts about how she never told him where they would meet that day, she doesn't notice that Jin-hoon is asking her to give him a tour. At that moment, she notices that Doo-joon is in the distance, approaching with the principal, and she lets out a scream that startles her companion. Without giving an explanation, she runs toward the man in a suit and takes his arm, not caring that he's with two other people, and leads him outside the school to ask him what he's doing there. With his usual serious expression, Doo-joon responds that he came to see her, and after comically asking her to let go of his hand, he asks if she wants a glass of water because she looks tired from the run, suggesting that, given her state, she should take better care of her health. This concern makes the protagonist blush, and she asks him to leave and come back once she's done working. But Doo-joon responds with a refusal, stating that he'll be busy when she finishes work, so they won't be able to see each other. To this, she explains that she needs to prepare for the second period now, so she doesn't have time to talk. In response, Doo-joon says he'll be brief with what he has to say and asks her to marry him, leaving her bewildered. After confirming she heard correctly, the protagonist asks if he's crazy, as his proposal makes no sense. Doo-joon makes it clear that he wants to fulfill his responsibility as a father and take care of the child, but the woman insists that he's not the baby's father, and she's the only one responsible, which prompts him to let out a loud, exasperated sigh. Hee-won suggests that she could call him that night to schedule a more appropriate meeting that would give them a better opportunity to talk. However, the man can't respond because voices approach from a distance, one of which the protagonist recognizes as her director's. Worried about him seeing her, considering he had already scolded her in the morning, she tries to come up with a plan to escape. However, as soon as she tries to peek around the corner, she comes face to face with her boss, startling each other and causing her to run into Doo-joon's arms. This confuses the director, who addresses the man as Mr. President to inquire what's happening. The protagonist slowly lifts herself from the man's chest to thank him for catching her before she fell and then points out the location of Daehan Middle School, further baffling everyone present. The director tries to get her to explain what's going on, to which the black-haired teacher explains that Doo-joon had gotten confused and had gone to Daehan High School when he actually wanted to go to Daehan Middle School. Of course, the man doesn't believe her and proceeds to apologize to the Mr. President, Doo-joon, suggesting that Hee-won might have mistaken him for someone else. Seeing that he knows the director and hearing how he addresses him, she realizes Hee-won's true identity. The man in the suit also asks the director if he can go ahead and see him in his office, as he would like to talk to Miss Jang first, claiming to know her. This simple request makes Hee-won's coworker understand who this woman is, so he plays along, asking the director if they could head to the office while discussing some matters they had, in order to divert any suspicion he might have at that moment. When they're alone again, Hee-won starts to sweat, worried, realizing that this man is the president of the Daehan Foundation and the owner of her school. This leads her to think that he might want to fire her and, in turn, suspect even more about her true intentions. Believing that he might think she's trying to use her baby as a means to get money from him, she tries to nip the problem in the bud with threats. All of this causes big tears to well up in her eyes, and she even blushes slightly. On the other hand, Doo-joon is just lost in the girl's face, blushing himself just from seeing her. Finally breaking the silence, he asks if she has something she wants to tell him, but Hee-won tries to regain her composure and repeats that she needs to go to her classroom to prepare for the second period. The president insists that they haven't finished talking, but she reminds him that the director also wanted to speak with him, so it's best to leave it at that for now. But Jin-hoon insists, saying he came there for the sole purpose of talking to her. Hearing this depresses Hee-won, and she mutters that she has an idea of what he wants to discuss. She grabs his tie, pulling him closer to meet her eyes. In her mind, she's certain that if he wants to fire her, he wouldn't beg, and she wants to show him that she can survive even without that job. However, Doo-joon, instead of harboring malicious thoughts, just gets nervous having her so close. The protagonist tells him that she'll submit her resignation letter before the end of the first semester, ensuring that she'll separate herself from his life forever. She emphasizes that if she leaves, it's because she's choosing to do so. She also mentions that she plans to take care of Doo-joon, a nickname that seems to have come to her mind in reference to the baby in the 2 lines. After asking if they're on the same page, she lets him go and leaves. However, in reality, Doo-joon is left confused by her whole declaration, though the thought of wanting to take responsibility for his child doesn't leave him. But he's nervous due to the rapid beating of his heart that's making him blush. Finally, Doo-joon and the worker who always accompanies him leave the school, bidding farewell politely to the director. Once they're at a safe distance, the man reprimands his boss for making such a sudden decision, completely disregarding the dinner they had planned for that night, which had been scheduled for over a week. He doesn't explain exactly what he means. The president says that as his secretary, he should be able to make those adjustments without any issues. He defends himself, saying he couldn't refuse the director's request after he insisted so much. This assertion leaves the secretary with a frustrated blue face, as the director had told him to come only if he was available. Similarly, he's concerned about how he could cancel a dinner planned so far in advance on such short notice. Doo-joon encourages him, smiling, reminding him that he had already told him he considered him the second most persuasive speaker in the nation, so achieving that should be a piece of cake. This seems to work on the worker, although curiously, he asks who the first is. His boss proudly claims that it's himself, which once again triggers the secretary's fury. He asks why, if he's so good, he doesn't cancel it himself. Hee-won adds that she wonders what led him to cancel such an important event, considering the determination he usually has when it comes to sticking to his schedule. The man doesn't respond. Instead, he comes to a halt, staring intently into the distance where Hee-won is walking alongside Jin-hoon through the hallways, the latter bursting into uncontrollable laughter. He calls his secretary, Si-hung, and asks him if he thought the name, Doo-joon, sounded similar to Doo-jool, but then he retracts and insists that he change his schedule to accommodate his new commitment. The secretary resignedly agrees. The conversation continues, mentioning that even though that woman was his fiancée, they seemed uncomfortable together. He asks if the whole commitment wasn't one-sided. Doo-joon is not pleased with this and lies, saying that she agreed, so she should back down. But his friend doesn't do that. Instead, he adds that Hee-won is peculiar but beautiful. This makes Doo-joon come to a sudden stop again, glaring at him. In her classroom, Hee-won is in front of Se-yeon, nervous, allowing only the ticking of the clock to be heard. After minutes of silence, the teacher asks if her uncle said anything unusual the day before, to which she denies, stating that her uncle is someone who isn't spontaneous and never does anything without meticulously planning it beforehand. This comment leads Hee-won to think that maybe their night of passion was planned, as he might have been strategizing a reproduction project with a random woman as if she were an insect. She doesn't elaborate further on this thought, as she's interrupted by her student, who asks to talk about something from the previous day. Nervously, the teacher agrees, and Se-yeon begins to explain that at the clinic, the woman who gave birth to her brother wasn't their real mother. She goes on to recount that her father and mother got married at 20 and had her a year later, sharing a passionate love despite her grandfather's disapproval of the relationship. Her description confuses Hee-won, but she's relieved that Se-yeon isn't talking about her. She asks why they separated if they were so happy. Se-yeon clarifies that her mother passed away years ago when she was only 6 years old, so she doesn't have many memories of her. In fact, she reveals that she was mostly raised by her uncle, about 80% of the time. But instead of delving into that, Se-yeon asks if she knew her father, Jun-kong, to which Hee-won shakes her head. According to Se-yeon, her dad was a famous painter known for his feminine paintings. He was the director of the Jun Gallery, and had even graced the cover of the art magazine several times. The latter detail seems to trigger recognition in Hee-won, who remembers that MI was a huge fan of his work and often bought multiple prints of his paintings. Thinking about that, she recalls that Jun-kong was going to marry a woman 12 years his junior, who she assumes is Se-yeon's stepmother. The younger girl continues her narrative, explaining that her stepmother used to work at the Jun Gallery. While she knew it was likely her father would remarry at some point, given his young age when he became a widower, she was still surprised by the age of his new partner. Calculating, the protagonist realizes that the age difference between Se-yeon and her stepmother would only be around 8 years, which explains her surprise. Se-yeon clarifies that they don't have a bad relationship, but that detail makes her see her more as an older sister than a maternal figure. Hee-won then asks if she's also on good terms with her father, which Se-yeon confirms. She explains that her uncle became more involved in her upbringing than her father because her dad had always been spontaneous and did whatever he wanted. This didn't make him good at taking care of a baby like her. Also, her grandparents were always busy, so her uncle ended up being the one to raise her. If it hadn't been for him, she would have been raised by a nanny. She reveals that her uncle is 4 years younger than her father, so she speculates that her father's significant influence might be the reason he's such a meticulous planner. A detail that only interests Hee-won because she's trying to deduce Doo-joon's age, which she estimates to be around 34. With that, Se-yeon finishes her story, commenting that while it's not an embarrassing story, she didn't feel right sharing it with her friends. This leads the teacher to ask her why she told it to her. Se-yeon explains that she thought they could exchange secrets. In other words, she liked the idea of having someone to talk to about her problems and concerns and who would keep the secrets she wanted to keep hidden. Hearing this, Hee-won's expression falls, and with embarrassment, she begins to recount what happened at the clinic yesterday. However, her student interrupts her, stating that she didn't care and that she could do whatever she wanted with her life, downplaying her concerns. She clarifies that she wouldn't judge her for anything, but she wouldn't force her to talk if she didn't want to. The only condition was that she share her own problems. This is something her teacher agrees to. With that said, the girl bids farewell, leaving the protagonist burying her face in her desk, admitting that she didn't know which of the two was the real teacher in that situation, thinking that she was very much like her uncle. As Se-yeon leaves, she's approached by her friend, Ra-ni, in a hurry. Without saying a word, Ra-ni takes her outside the school and tells her some big news. Tae-woo and Ki-young were going to have a one-on-one basketball match on the court. These names bring negative feelings to Se-yeon, who reveals that one of those guys was her classmate and the other her neighbor. For some reason, she says she's leaving because lunchtime is over. But her friend continues with her gossip. It turns out that the match was over a girl. This catches Se-yeon's interest, as she thinks Tae-woo is capable of that. So, both of them enter the court where a crowd has gathered, as Tae-woo is quite popular. Ra-ni gives more details about the problem, recounting that the issue started with Ki-young talking about a girl as if she belonged to him. Tae-woo overheard and confronted him, something he doesn't usually do. The long-haired girl gets excited and imagines hearts floating around. Although Tae-woo's scolding was enough to make Ki-young embarrassed, he still wanted to fight. So, Tae-woo suggested they settle it with a one-on-one basketball match. Se-yeon concludes that it was to avoid getting into trouble. Then she asks if her friend knows who the girl is. Her classmate replies that she didn't know and didn't care. What mattered was the reason for the fight, not who it was about. At that moment, both guys enter the room, exciting everyone. Sitting on the floor, Ra-ni tells her friend that she must have been very good in her past life to be blessed with such a handsome neighbor. Se-yeon disagrees, though, saying that Tae-woo Jang, the brown-haired guy with yellow eyes, pretended to be kind and polite when he was actually lazy and exploited others' weaknesses for his own benefit. His facade was so good that even his father didn't believe her when she complained about him, completely rejecting the idea of moving. That's why this conflict excites her, as if he had a girlfriend, he would finally leave her alone. At that moment, Tae-woo takes off his school jacket and walks away from Ki-young, the blonde guy he's about to face. He approaches the girls and playfully throws his jacket over Se-yeon's head. This action causes a commotion among the audience, who find it charming and romantic. They start murmuring that she must be the reason for the basketball face-off. Annoyed, she takes off the jacket and tosses it to her friend for safekeeping before leaving the scene. Walking away, she thinks that rumors will now start circulating between her and Ki-young. She assumes that Tae-woo didn't like others talking about her because he didn't want anyone else but him bothering her. So, she decides it might be easier to find a girlfriend for Tae-woo herself to get rid of him. On her way, she encounters Jin-hoon. The adult doesn't say anything, but he realizes what's happening. He goes to sit next to Ra-ni-ku, who blushes because the handsome student teacher is sitting beside her. Jin-hoon recalls seeing Se-yeon enter Hee-won's classroom for a private conversation, which is why he'll try to find out what they talked about through Hee-won's friend. Meanwhile, Hee-won had arrived at a fairly luxurious Hanwoo restaurant with her fellow teacher friend. The dark-haired woman wonders how they managed to invite everyone to such an expensive place. Another teacher approaches and mentions that the president, Doo-joon, will be coming to dinner tonight, so he's probably the one covering the bill. This surprises Hee-won, who doesn't understand why he did that. When she and her friend sit at a table, Jin-hoon approaches and asks if he can sit, arguing that he's shy around people he doesn't know. She naturally refuses, but her short-haired friend insists that he sit. As the young man takes his seat, he notices that the president has arrived at the restaurant, recognizing him from having seen him once 3 years ago. The length of time since he saw him gives Hee-won hope, thinking that maybe she confused him, as it wouldn't make sense for the school president to attend such a personal dinner. Her surprise is significant when she turns around and sees that, indeed, Jin-hoon is there, staring at her intently. Of course, this makes her hit her forehead in confusion about why he's there and, to top it off, why he looks angry. Jin-hoon notices this and tries to ask her what's wrong, placing his hand on her shoulder for support. This act infuriates Hee-won, and with a dark expression, she demands that he remove his hand. With everyone gathered, the school principal captures everyone's attention, thanking them for coming to the commemorative dinner for the new semester. Instead of giving a speech, he decides to hand the floor over to Doo-joon for honoring them with his presence. The elegant man stands up and comments that when he was in school, what he disliked the most was listening to his principal talk. That's why he deemed giving a speech for a personal dinner unnecessary, so he simply asks everyone to eat what they want and enjoy their evening. The short speech is appreciated by the staff, who give a hearty round of applause, happy with the brevity. As Doo-joon takes his seat, he notices the group of Professor Kong and how she was angry about the familiarity with which Jin-hoon spoke to her. One of the teachers he's sitting with asks him why he's not eating and why he's fixated on the entrance. The president defends himself by saying that the food is exquisite and asks about Jin-hoon, wanting to confirm if he's also a teacher. The principal clarifies that he's a student teacher from Youngwoon University. Upon hearing this, Doo-joon wonders if Hee-won prefers younger men. Seeing that he's still staring at the group, the professor beside him offers to call Jin-hoon. Thus, the bespectacled teacher calls Jin-hoon to come closer. Nervously, Jin-hoon asks what they need him for, to which the director tries to confirm if he's a student, which he confirms, revealing he's in his 4th year. Doo-joon indicates that he shouldn't be nervous, as he only wanted to talk to him to see how they teach university students these days. He invites Jin-hoon to sit down. As he sits, the president asks for his opinion on a sociological theory by Emil Durkheim, which, of course, bewilders the young man. Next, with a serious look, Doo-joon asks Jin-hoon what he thinks about how rude it is to place a hand on another person's spouse. This question, instead of scaring him, confuses both him and the director. Quickly, he changes his expression to a more serene one with a smile, declaring that he was just joking, although it only amuses the bespectacled professor sitting next to him. After this, Doo-joon asks Jin-hoon if he can handle alcohol and pours him a glass, which he accepts, even though the president himself refuses to drink, saying he has to drive and take someone home. As he takes his sip, Jin-hoon notices the director's hateful gaze on him and uncomfortably wonders if he did something wrong to offend him. On her part, Hee-won refuses to look, for obvious reasons, saying she only wants to drink water that day. However, shortly after, she says she's feeling a bit cold, so she'll leave early. The brown-haired woman says she'll leave too, but the protagonist stops her, seeing that she hadn't even finished eating yet. She complains that she won't have anyone to talk to if she leaves. Hee-won watches Jin-hoon return, slightly tipsy, and says she could talk to him. This excites her deeply. Feeling guilty, the brunette approaches to whisper that she shouldn't trust him, as he prefers hotels over trips, a total wolf. The declaration has the opposite effect than intended, as Miss Kim starts laughing hysterically, declaring that if someone like Jin-hoon is a wolf, she'd accept him with open arms. Hee-won gives up and bids her good night. Outside the venue, Hee-won starts shivering from the cold when Doo-joon approaches from behind, startling her. The man apologizes and offers to give her a ride, something she declines, but he gives her his jacket to keep her warm, surprising her. Then, Doo-joon asks her what she's doing, to which she responds that she's going home but got lost because she has a bad sense of direction when going to a new place, something she acknowledges is a lie and doesn't even understand why she said it. This supports Doo-joon's argument to give her a ride, saying he has a very good sense of direction they can rely on. The girl still seems hesitant, so the president continues by saying that he wouldn't have even attended the dinner if not for her, and that they have a lot to talk about, so they should make use of the time. Hee-won eventually agrees, and they head to his car quickly, as Doo-joon says he's feeling cold, although he quickly clarifies that he's not cold enough to retrieve his jacket. Once in the car, he makes a joke asking if, even with her terrible sense of direction, she knows the way home, which only earns him an eye roll from the protagonist. Nevertheless, it lightens the mood, so he takes the opportunity to ask if she had considered his proposal from earlier in the day. Hee-won answers him directly, saying that she didn't want to marry him. As she referred to him as Mr. President, he corrects her, reminding her that his name is Jun-kong and emphasizing that his name is very important to him. Furthermore, he reminds her that that morning she also made a mistake by calling him Doo-joon. To this, Hee-won clarifies that she wasn't referring to him, but to her baby. This causes great annoyance in Doo-joon as he realizes she's coming up with nicknames without him, but the protagonist defends herself by saying that the baby is solely hers. A vein starts forming on the guy's forehead, and suddenly he stops the car and looks directly into her eyes. He asks her if she had proof that the child wasn't his. Hee-won doesn't provide any proof, but emphasizes that she doesn't understand why he insists so much that the baby is his. Something she herself says, not understanding why she denied so much that he wasn't, and she tells him that if he wanted to convince her of what he said, then he should show her the boyfriend with whom she plans to get married, and whose existence she doubts. The declaration shocks the protagonist, but not as much as when he criticizes her for giving the baby the nickname Doo-joon, because, according to him, there were many better options, asking if she was a teacher of art or mathematics to come up with something so embarrassing. Hee-won clarifies that she was a Korean teacher but that she would keep the nickname Doo-joon for their baby just because she felt like it. She says the word R, which makes Doo-joon blush, causing him to ultimately give in to calling their baby Doo-joon. Realizing this, the protagonist goes on to explain that she used R in a way where the speaker includes themselves and the people around them, not necessarily including him. The technical explanation leads Doo-joon to confirm that she was undoubtedly a Korean teacher, although he responds in the same technical manner, clarifying that he was the only person around at the moment, so the R she, the speaker, used could only include him. Therefore, in conclusion, he admitted that Doo-joon was their baby. In response to this, Hee-won proceeds to ask if he had a reproduction project underway, something the president doesn't understand. She continues by saying that usually, in those kinds of situations, when a woman says no, that should be the end of the conversation, especially if, like her, she clarifies that she wouldn't even bother him with raising the child. Doo-joon says that, simply, that wasn't a direction he'd like to go, so the conversation shouldn't end so easily. Now more resigned to the situation, the protagonist asks him, then, what he wanted from her, to which he reiterates that he wanted them to get married, something Hee-won kept insisting she didn't want to do. Doo-joon asks her the reason for this, if it was because she didn't like him. In her mind, Hee-won thinks it was impossible not to like him, with such a beautiful body and face, but she knew that marriage went beyond whether you liked a person or not. Not having an answer, Doo-joon asks her to give him a reason not to get married. Neither you nor I know anything about each other, is what the protagonist replies, but Doo-joon doesn't give in, saying that he knew she had a genuine interest in helping disadvantaged people, the name of the book she was reading, the music she was listening to a month ago, the places she liked to be touched to get aroused, how ticklish she was if her muscles were touched, and the way she sighed when he bit her earlobe. Initially, Hee-won seemed indifferent to the trivial facts, but she ends up blushing when it comes to intimate details, making her ask him to stop. Her companion is willing to continue, so the teacher decides to retract her words to stop him. Now, she tells him that they didn't know each other well enough to get married. In response, Doo-joon suggests that they continue getting to know each other, building a marriage. This doesn't convince the protagonist, who declares that a marriage, a family, should start with love, and he didn't love her, and she certainly didn't love him. So, the primitive impulses they also had for each other would disappear over time. Then, Doo-joon suggests that they start loving each other from that moment, starting by getting to know each other. Following this, he says that if he adjusted his schedule a bit, he could be available tomorrow for them to go out in the afternoon. She excuses herself, saying she had plans with her friends, but he indicates that if they were the same ones she met at the clinic, they could join them. Even if they didn't start as they should, he thought it was fine to start now by going on a date. Directly, Hee-won says no, angering Doo-joon, who calls her irresponsible. While under normal circumstances, he'd accept her rejection, now that they have Doo-joon, her refusal to go on a date to at least get to know each other better makes it seem like she simply didn't want to make an effort for her son's happiness. Considering that the best thing for Doo-joon would be to have a united family, he insists that they first go on a date to see if they could give it to him. The powerful declaration leaves Hee-won dumbfounded, granting his point and accepting the date, making it clear that she hadn't yet accepted his marriage proposal. Despite this last part, Doo-joon lets out a smile, causing Hee-won to think with annoyance that he seemed to always get what he wanted. MIRA is lying on the couch when she hears her roommate coming in, so she shouts to her that she found something. However, she doesn't finish saying what it is, as she notices Hee-won is accompanied by Min-wook. The brown-haired woman scolds her, saying that even if she was upset, she should have let her friend into the house, as she found him crying in the hallway. This doesn't stop the redhead from glaring at her boyfriend until everyone is seated in the living room, and she proceeds to explain that she discovered her baby's father as the vice president of the Daehan group, something that, for obvious reasons, doesn't surprise the protagonist. However, thinking that she didn't believe her, MI said she knew he was, as his face looked familiar to her from before, because she met him last year when her father introduced them at a charity event for the Daehan group. This catches Min Wook's attention, and he asks her exactly when she met him, to which the redhead, without thinking, says it was on December 31st, the same day he asked to see the bell ringing in the new year. That was a lie she never revealed to him, and when she notices the redhead gets nervous. Hee-won tries to support her by saying that her father practically dragged her to that place, so she shouldn't feel like it's a lie. Nevertheless, the guy stands up, radiating an aura of annoyance, and calls MI to talk privately, which she nervously accepts. The couple locks themselves in a room, where the redhead immediately apologizes for lying to him, clarifying that she had no other choice, as her father forced her, and, as he knew, he could be quite aggressive with her due to his disappointment that she hadn't followed in her sister's footsteps, making it clear that he also wanted to see the ceremony to ring the bell. Min Wook listens attentively to her explanation and then clarifies that he didn't care about her lie, and what he wanted to talk about was what happened yesterday. When he mentions the topic, MI's posture changes from defensive to more critical. Her partner goes on to explain that he and Hee-won grew up together since their mothers are close. For that same reason, Hee-won's mother used to leave her with them when they were children, revealing that the first day that happened, Hee-won didn't laugh but instead asked, very seriously, if her mom had abandoned her. Something that, according to her mom, would have been much less sad if she had said it while crying and having a tantrum. He continues to say that, for him, Hee-won was his family. He considered her his older sister, his younger sister, and even like a twin, which is why he had never been able to think of her as a woman. Although that didn't prevent his protective instincts from kicking in as a habit, so he asks her to understand. Despite his words, MI still seems doubtful about it, so Min Wook speaks again to tell her that even if he only thought of Hee-won as family and protected her out of habit, he would try to change that habit if it was something that deeply bothered her, as he didn't know how much it hurt her. This leaves MI shocked, not knowing what to say. Min Wook goes on to say that he must love her a lot, as he was so preoccupied with not talking to her that he couldn't concentrate on his work, and he spent the whole day outside to see if they could fix things. So, his business would probably officially fail before it even started. Because of this, he sarcastically comments that if Chul-gon knew he was there, he would probably kill him. MI, red-faced from the honesty of his words, tells him that if that's the case, he might as well die. His response amuses Min Wook, who asks if she wasn't mad at him anymore, something the redhead, though she denies it, makes it clear that she's not. Min Wook stands up and cups her face, asking for a kiss, which she initially refuses because Hee-won is in the living room. Although he insists that it will only be a kiss, she ends up giving in. However, they quickly end up on the bed, with him on top of her, intending to go further. A little later, both of them return to the protagonist, blushing and disheveled. Next, we see Hee-won walking with Doo-joon, followed by Min Wook and Mi, who hide behind a post in black clothes to go unnoticed, despite it being broad daylight. Of course, the duo notices them and, confused, the now casually dressed president asks if he told them they could accompany them, which the protagonist confirms, so he can only apologize that her friends are so strange. Remembering what happened the previous night after her friends were together, they questioned Hee-won to tell them everything that happened. She recounted how she met Doo-joon, his marriage proposal, and the upcoming date they would have. In response to this, the couple is impressed that he turned out to be such a good person, so they decide that they will investigate him because it's suspicious how perfect he seems. Back in the present, both of them are behind Doo-joon and Hee-won in an elevator, pretending to read a newspaper, which annoys Hee-won, who didn't expect them to follow them and be so obvious about it. Wanting to focus on Doo-joon once and for all, she notices that his more casual clothing makes him look quite good, even if he's not wearing a suit like yesterday. She stared at him for so long that Doo-joon ended up admitting that he wanted to wear those clothes to look younger, which saddens Hee-won a bit. Doo-joon asks her age, to which she replies that she's 27 years old. He was about to reveal his age as well, but the protagonist stops him, saying she already knows from having talked with Se-yeon about her family the previous day. Mentioning her brother, Doo-joon lets out a tired sigh, but they don't delve into that. Upon exiting the elevator, he asks to drop the formalities, which the protagonist accepts, although when he calls her by her first name, she blushes and says it might be too soon. But Doo-joon doesn't hear her and suggests that she could call him Oppa, which is a term used for very close people. Of course, this makes her blush and she ends up opting to call him Mr. Kong, or simply Doo-joon. Upon arriving at the movie theater lobby, the guy asks her to excuse him and approaches Mi-ra and Min-wook to greet them and ask if, since they came, they'd like to enter the theater with them, a request they accept. From a distance, Hee-won insults them, confused about the point of following them from a distance if they were going to accept their proposal to join them anyway. In the movie theater hall, the protagonist notices that, apart from the seats where the four of them are sitting, everything else is completely empty. So, she asks if he bought all the seats to have privacy. Doo-joon denies this, saying he simply asked the manager to reserve that hall for 3 hours for them to be alone. Upon hearing this, Hee-won remembers that this movie theater chain was affiliated with the Day Group. Doo-joon asks her if there's any particular movie she wants to watch, to which she says he can choose any. She then proceeds to worry about trivial things like the softness of the cushions or the seat positions, even offering to fetch different popcorn and drinks if she wants. Hee-won declines any requests, although Min-wook approaches to tell her that she actually likes cheese popcorn, and she prefers mango over strawberry. Upon hearing this, Doo-joon, without getting upset, suggests making those changes, but the protagonist is hesitant. Min-wook intervenes again, saying that if they were both trying to get to know each other, they should discuss these little things that could cause harm to their long-term relationship. His diatribe is stopped by Mi-ra, who looks quite angry. Min-wook then leaves them and approaches his girlfriend to tell her not to eat all the popcorn, to which she says she'll eat whatever she wants. When a theater employee approaches the hall, Doo-joon asks her for popcorn and drinks as Mi-ra likes them, and he also requests that they play the most popular movie they have. Hero 008 was the movie they ended up playing, a movie that amazes Hee-won, as it was something she wanted to see, although she didn't know it was already out. There's a moment when it's uncertain if one man will shoot another, full of suspense. The protagonist wonders if he will do it or not, an unknown that she maintains, as Doo-joon ends up covering her eyes, preventing her from seeing. Confused, she asks him why he's doing this, to which he apologizes for choosing such a violent movie, not suitable for a pregnant woman. She obviously mentions that being rated R doesn't mean she can't watch it, but Doo-joon states that she can't watch it because Doo-jool is inside her, and he's too young. Naturally, she gets angry at the stupidity of this, especially when he covers her eyes again as gunshots and explosions are heard on the screen. She grabs his hand to complain about his behavior, not considering how close they are. Being inches from her face, both of them blush and lean in for a kiss, not quite sure what they're doing. However, a new explosion in the movie makes them suddenly aware and they pull away nervously. On the other side of the couch, Hee-won admits that she suddenly remembered that night when his lips were roaming all over her body and the sweet taste of his lips when he kissed her. These memories make her blush, and then she suddenly shifts her gaze and sees Min-wook and Mi-ra, who are hugging and laughing happily. Seeing that scene, the protagonist becomes sad, thinking that at that moment, her heart and body were heading in completely opposite directions. Exiting the theater, the roles were reversed, with Min-wook and Mi-ra walking ahead, chatting animatedly, while Hee-won and Doo-joon were walking behind them in silence. Mi-ra and Min-wook's conversation is interrupted when the latter receives a message from Chul-gon, who informs him that the logo was done and he needed to take a look. But instead of leaving her, he asks the redhead if she wanted to accompany him, so she could help him choose from the 3 logos he created, a proposal she happily accepts. So, the couple says goodbye, leaving Hee-won and the president in an awkward silence. Doo-joon tries to dispel the gloomy atmosphere by taking her hand, saying they should also leave, something she agrees with, although she doesn't show the same happiness as her friend. Later, they're eating at a restaurant when Doo-joon asks her if she didn't enjoy the movie, as she looked depressed since they left the theater. Hee-won says it was because she felt bad for the main character of the movie. He used to be much more active before, but the movie ended with him being so old that he couldn't climb the mountain anymore. He used to be like a hero to her, so it was sad to see him in that state, feeling like they took her hero away. Despite her statement, she tries to downplay it, saying it's silly, but Min-wook tries to cheer her up, telling her that he could become her hero. Although he asks if he should climb a mountain without sweating or develop more muscles to do that, the joke seems to cheer her up as she laughs, though she lets out a heavy sigh afterward. Upon this, Doo-joon can't bear it and asks her a question. He wanted to know if she was in love with Min-wook. This surprises Hee-won, who tries to tell him he got it wrong, but Doo-joon interrupts her, with his doubt being enough of an answer, saying it didn't matter who she had feelings for in reality. He reminds her that they were both adults who were now trying to take responsibility as parents trying to create a family. That's why he was doing everything possible to make it work, and he asked the same of her. The protagonist dryly says she knew that. So, Doo-joon continues by indicating that if that's the case, she should agree to the following proposal. He wanted both of them to start meeting at least 4 times a week, so they would have to adjust their schedules to make it happen. Unlike other times, she agrees, although in her mind, she shows disbelief at how cold and realistic he could be, asking questions whose answers were actually predetermined. A situation that makes her wonder who the real Jun-kong is. After taking a sip of her coffee, Doo-joon asks her if she slept with him to get back at Manhwa. Hee-won thinks about it and ends up asking if it really mattered. Doo-joon answers that it was important, because as long as they were seeing each other, he would be faithful to her, so he expected the same from her and that she wouldn't put him in the middle of her relationship with Manhwa. Hee-won clarifies that their whole relationship was one-sided, and when she was with him, she was in the process of getting over it. So, the thing she was worried about happening wouldn't happen. Something that seems to calm him, although Hee-won just looks embarrassed, wondering how he found out about her feelings for Manhwa. 2 weeks had passed since that date. During that time, Hee-won and Doo-joon had gone out 7 times, going to luxury places or simply having dinner in the car. On each date, he had been quite courteous, a true gentleman, but Hee-won couldn't help feeling that they weren't making any progress. She thinks that if they were a normal couple, the sensations would have been different, but now they only feel like part of a business. Sitting on a bench in the middle of the day, she receives a message from him. They didn't talk unless it was to arrange some date, and the messages were quite dry, when they should be sending cheesy messages expressing how much they loved or missed each other, even sending heart emojis. Moreover, even before that, she found it quite difficult to get used to his wealth, which was another problem for the development of their relationship. All of this made her doubt if she would really take his marriage proposal seriously. Her thoughts are interrupted by Se-yeon, who approaches to greet her, saying she should be in gym class, but she was allowed to skip it due to a stomachache, and she decided to rest outdoors instead of going to the infirmary because it was too hot there. After her explanation, both women lower their heads with a loud sigh. They notice their own attitude, but before providing explanations, both of them notice a man who goes to pick up a soccer ball that bounced nearby, flexing his muscles as he does. Seeing this, Se-yeon comments to her teacher that the physics teacher, who retrieved the ball, was in love with her, to which she responds that spreading rumors like that is impolite, but her student insists that it was quite obvious. To stop her, the protagonist reminds her that she had said she wanted to vent about her problems, but never did. Se-yeon realizes she's right, so she asks if she knows who Tae-woo Jang is, a third-year student, a name that the teacher recognizes as the guy from class 3-2 who had a crush on her. This angers Se-yeon, but Hee-won defends herself by saying that his feelings were quite obvious, as they always went to and from school together on their bikes. Se-yeon gives her back the scolding for spreading such rumors, causing the protagonist to laugh. Then, she adds that it was just because she wanted to go alone that she bought a bike, but Tae-woo got the same one. Then, she asks her teacher if she knows how to get rid of someone she doesn't want, a question that worries Hee-won, wondering if she somehow offended her. Upon hearing this, the girl gets excited, saying that she's the first person to speak ill of Tae-woo. Obviously, she understands that it wasn't her intention, but just the thought that she could bother her was enough for Se-yeon, and that alone gave her the courage not to give up. So, she hugs her, grateful. In the end, Hee-won fails to ask for more details as Jin-hoon approaches, calling Hee-won again, irritatingly, as Sunbae, to her annoyance, to let her know that they should go inside to prepare for their next class. Upon this, Se-yeon says goodbye, leaving them alone. After a couple of seconds, Hee-won scolds him for not addressing her as Miss Jang, as she instructed earlier, and she leaves as well, annoyed. Although Jin-hoon just lets out a smile, commenting that she doesn't leave him with many options, but over time, he will see how much he can maintain his haughty attitude. In his office, Si-hung was explaining the situation about various business matters of his company to his boss. Although Doo-joon wasn't paying attention, his thoughts flooded with images of Hee-won. Remembering how they met, he felt that everything had just clicked into place in his life that day. His meeting ended 30 minutes early, so he decided to go for a drink. That night he felt impulsive, so he was open to meeting someone, and when Hee-won approached him, saying she had found the perfect person for her plan, he missed his chance to say no, bewildered by how she approached him, even if what he thought when he saw her was that she was someone absurd and foolish. Hee-won ordered the same thing as him and raised her glass for a toast, which he accepted. Talking to her was surprisingly easy, so they ended up talking for over an hour non-stop. She turned out to be intelligent and warm, bold yet shy at the same time, with eyes that felt like they transmitted a pure love for him. After a while, he asks her about her plan, to which Hee-won explained, nervously, her desire to lose her virginity. The idea didn't bother him, although Se-yeon thought that maybe that moment of impulsiveness was actually part of an even bigger plan that she wasn't aware of. He felt both a physical and emotional connection, which heightened his disappointment when he found some simple bills next to his bed. Si-hung finally notices that his boss isn't paying attention, so he asks him to focus on what he's saying, but he only asks him if he thinks he's unlikable. Si-hung quickly tells him that yes, he is, so Jin-hoon asks him for more details. Si-hung explains that as an executive, he's great in calculating, but that same quality makes him easily angered if things don't go as planned, saying how frustrating it is that he's now canceling meetings and changing schedules at his whim, putting the secretarial team under a lot of pressure. Although the businessman downplays this last part, saying that he's exaggerating and that he actually wanted to know if he was unlikable as a man. This surprises Si-hung, so, more concerned, he approaches his friend to ask him what's wrong, as he's acting strangely. Doo-joon responds with a metaphor, explaining that he feels like an umbrella after the rain stops. He explains how when you pack an umbrella because of the rain and it stops raining, that object becomes a hindrance that gets in its owner's way. Upon hearing the explanation, Si-hung immediately assumes that Hee-won Jang called him useless, although the dark-haired man clarifies that's not the case. Then, he thinks about Jin-hoon again and how his hair was completely straight, while his was more messy, and he asks if he looked old to her. Si-hung assumes that she called him old, but his boss denies it again. Because of all this, Si-hung feels that she didn't like him much, so he advises him to shower her with gifts to change that. However, Doo-joon clarifies that every time he tried, she refused to accept it, so he tried asking his niece to see what her teacher liked. The girl told him that she was fascinated by spicy rice cakes, something that triggers his friend's mockery. Upon this, Doo-joon stands up, saying he'll go get some spicy rice cakes, not caring that he has a forthcoming meeting with the shareholders, asking to reschedule it without worrying too much about him. So, he waits in the car for her to come out, and when he sees her, he thinks she looks beautiful as always, although his expression turns into anger as he sees her happy next to the physical education teacher. Now alone, the protagonist leans against the wall when she receives a call from Doo-joon, who asks if she had left school for him to pick her up. She asks him why, since they saw each other yesterday, although she tries to correct herself, embarrassed. But the businessman reminds her that they hadn't met the predetermined 4 times that week. She tries to make excuses not to see him, but in the end, he indicates that he'll come for her in about 20 minutes, slightly disappointing her. While waiting, she hears screams coming from a room. It's Mr. Jung-go, a teacher who's shouting at a student, showing how strict he is, assuming it's related to what happened last year. The scoldings are interrupted by Ji-hoon, who approaches to try to defend the girl, although he only ends up increasing their anger and causing Hee-won herself to comment that he still hadn't learned when he should intervene and when not, as he'll only fan the flames of his anger. Of course, when he hears Jung-go mentioning her disparagingly, she also approaches to defend the student, saying that her mistake was harmless and she'll take care of giving her a stern warning the next time she doesn't write the questionnaires properly. Ra-ni-ko apologizes and, at the teacher's request, they get ready to leave. However, Jung-go criticizes the attitude of the young people of these days, including the younger teachers. This angers the protagonist, who confronts him, starting an argument where he defends himself by saying that he has the right to express himself freely, to which she says that there are things that can be talked about and others that can't, especially in the presence of other staff members. Professor Jung-go doesn't back down and mocks her for wanting to give him a lecture. Hee-won looks at him seriously and asks him if he's being so rude to her because she refused to write a volunteer service activity report for him last year, clarifying that she's not his assistant and she already did him the favor of writing his reports several times before that. This infuriates Jung-go if she really believed that he bothered her with that, something she confirms without shame. But the man stands up from his seat, demanding that she repeat it, worrying the protagonist about what he might do to her. Fortunately, the physical education teacher, Shin, arrives to calm the situation, saying that it's not wrong to give a student a lecture and maybe it was Miss Jang who misunderstood everything, urging her to leave already and reminding her that he was going fishing that night. Exclaiming that he had never been spoken to like that in his 20 years as a teacher, Jung-go leaves, indignant, with the rest of the group feeling somewhat nervous. At the exit, Professor Shin approaches Hee-won, and she thanks him for intervening earlier to rescue her. He apologizes, saying that in the end, he still sided with Jung-go, so she shouldn't bother. But even Hee-won says that she shouldn't have intervened in the first place, thinking that lately she found it difficult to control her emotions, possibly due to the pregnancy. Blushing, the teacher asks her if she has a boyfriend and, if not, if she wants to go out with him that night. Upon hearing this, Hee-won remembers Se-yeon's words that he was in love with him and agrees. Still, she ends up refusing, confessing that she is seeing someone, which creates an uncomfortable atmosphere between them. Despite that, when they reach the exit, the protagonist tries to bid him farewell politely, although Doo-joon, with a throbbing vein on his forehead, shouts her name with a smile, waving to get her attention, annoying the protagonist. Shin recognizes the man as the president and, seeing that he's calling her, assumes that he's the person she's seeing. Hee-won doesn't answer him and quickly runs towards Doo-joon, wondering mentally why he's behaving like that. Much to her surprise, the businessman also starts running towards her. In the end, due to not paying attention, she trips over a stone that almost makes her fall, but luckily, Doo-joon catches her before she falls, creating a romantic scene that makes everyone present start murmuring, with Professor Shin even wondering if they're filming a romantic movie. Doo-joon scolds her for doing something so reckless while being pregnant, although she just asks him to put her down, embarrassed that everyone is looking at her. Doo-joon questions who the guy was, but she doesn't answer and forcefully pushes him into the car to start scolding him for calling her out of the car, knowing that everyone at her school knew who he was. Doo-joon apologizes, saying he didn't think about that. Thinking about what just happened, Hee-won recalls that it was in a weekly economics magazine where they said he was quite strong, something that makes Doo-joon assume she read about him, although she denies it, blushing. Changing the subject, Doo-joon asks who the person she was walking with was, to which Hee-won tells him it was Mr. Shin, a colleague from work who had helped him with something, and she was thanking him for that. Doo-joon says they looked too friendly for just that kind of conversation. To this, the protagonist admits that she had asked him if he had a boyfriend, to which she responded by saying she was seeing someone. Doo-joon isn't satisfied and questions her why she would want to know that. Frustrated, Hee-won replies that they aren't so indifferent towards men to not be interested in her, which the businessman responds that he already knew, because that's how he ended up in that situation, causing her to blush. Continuing with the topic, Doo-joon reminds her that he asked her to commit to him until she made her final decision. Something that Hee-won says she already knew, and that's why she told Shin she was seeing someone. The description she gives, seeing someone, seems to bother Doo-joon. Once they start the car, Doo-joon tells his companion that they'll go eat spicy rice cakes, an invitation that confuses her instead of exciting her as the businessman had hoped. At the school, Ra-ni-ko was with her friend, Se-yeon, who scolded her for filling out her questionnaire incorrectly, to which she defends herself by saying it was her teacher's fault for not taking a joke. Quickly dismissing it, she asks Se-yeon where her bike and Tae-woo were. With a sarcastic tone, Se-yeon tells her that her beloved Tae-woo was in a science club meeting and that she was going to pick up her bike. Confused, the dark-haired girl asks why she would break it, and also points out that those meetings were only on Wednesdays, so she didn't understand why the guy was in one. To both questions, Se-yeon responds with a curt, "I don't care." On their way out, the girls quickly approach a crowd to find out what's going on, and they are told that Professor Jang had jumped into a guy's arms. The description that initiates a detailed account of what happened, of which Se-yeon is trying to remain indifferent. Jin-hoon then exits the building as well and advises the girls to go home before it gets late, bidding them farewell and leaving Ra-ni with heart eyes, entranced. Se-yeon suggests they should leave, but the dark-haired girl takes her by the arm and runs after the substitute teacher to thank him for intervening earlier in the teacher's office. To which Jin-hoon brushes it off and instead invites them to go buy some spicy rice cakes since they were leaving school. Ra-ni accepts with excitement, but Jin-hoon declines, so her friend insists until he remembers that he forgot some test papers, which could cause problems if he doesn't solve it. Therefore, he quickly rushes back to school, shouting at her friend not to wait for her or she'll be hated. Thus, Jun-kong is left with Jin-hoon Lee, thinking about how Ra-ni-ko always did whatever she pleased, while the substitute teacher looks at the girl with a mischievous smile, thinking he might get the information he wants. And that's how the first part of this manhwa ends. If you have reached this part of the video, let me tell you that you have been one of the few people to make it here. So comment the word "love" in the comments. Remember to subscribe to not miss any videos. With that said, see you in the next video.